It is the 14th of January, 1940. The temperature is 41 degrees below zero. A Soviet patrol of 9 men moves through a frozen Finnish forest. They are armed. They are alert. Their rifles have telescopic sights. Their commanding officer has warned them specifically about this sector. Men have been disappearing here. Whole patrols. No witnesses, no sounds, no explanation. The soldiers move in formation, close together, watching the tree line, watching the snowdrifts, watching everything. They do not see him. He has been lying in this snowdrift for 3 hours and 20 minutes. He has not moved. He has not eaten. He has not made a sound. He is 5 feet and 3 inches tall. He weighs 150 pounds. He is 34 years old. He is a farmer. He has no telescopic sight on his rifle. He is wearing no special gear, no advanced optics, no radio, no spotter. He has a bolt-action rifle, iron sights, and 22 years of hunting in these exact forests. The patrol passes 280 meters in front of him. He exhales slowly. He fires once. The lead soldier drops. The remaining 8 take cover behind trees. They search the tree line desperately. They fire in the general direction of the shot. Dozens of rounds. They hit nothing. He has already moved. By the time Finnish scouts recover those 9 Soviet soldiers 3 days later, all 9 are dead. None of them ever saw who was shooting. This happened not once, not 10 times, not 50 times. This happened for 98 consecutive days of war. His name was Simo Häyhä. By the end of those 98 days, he had killed more enemy soldiers than any sniper in recorded military history. His confirmed rifle kills alone exceeded 432. His total confirmed combat kills, rifle and submachine gun combined, reached 542. The Soviets called him Belaya Smert, White Death. They never once saw his face. This is his story. If you want to know how a quiet Finnish farmer became the most lethal individual soldier in the history of modern warfare, stay with me. Subscribe if you're new. Let's get into it. Simo Häyhä was born on the 17th of December, 1905, in the municipality of Raudjärvi in southeastern Finland. This is important, not the date, the place. Raudjärvi sits fewer than 20 kilometers from what was then the Russian border. The people who lived there had spent generations watching Russia with one eye open. Finland had been under Russian imperial control until 1917. Independence was fresh. The memory of foreign rule was not. The forest around Raudjärvi was not decorative. It was not a park. It was dense, old-growth Nordic terrain. Pine, spruce, birch, frozen lakes. Marshland that hardened into unpredictable ice in winter and turned to bog in summer. The terrain swallowed people who didn't understand it and rewarded those who did. Simo's father owned approximately 150 acres of this land. The family farmed rye and potatoes. They kept cattle. They kept pigs. They were not wealthy. They were not poor. They were Finnish farm people, which meant they were self-sufficient, quiet, and hard. Simo was the second of 8 children. He attended school until age 14, which was standard for rural Finnish boys of that era. After that, he worked the land full-time. But from the age of 12, he hunted. This is not a small detail. This is the entire story. The forests around Raudjärvi held elk, deer, wolves, foxes, and bear. Hunting was not a hobby. It was a source of food. It taught skills that cannot be learned in a classroom or on a training range. Reading terrain, identifying cover, understanding how sound moves through frozen trees differently than through summer leaves, knowing that breath vapor in cold air gives away position. knowing that muzzle blast disturbs snow in ways that can be spotted from 300 meters, knowing that prey, whether animal or eventually human, moves in patterns, and that patience is the only way to exploit those patterns. By the time Simo Häyhä was 20 years old, he was the most skilled hunter in his region. Local competition records confirm this. He could track a fox across hard-packed snow. He could hit a running target at 400 meters with a bolt-action rifle. He could lie motionless in minus 30-degree temperatures for hours without flinching. These are not skills the Finnish army taught him. These are skills the Finnish wilderness gave him before he was old enough to shave. In 1925, at the age of 20, Häyhä completed his mandatory military service with the Finnish Civil Guard, the Suojeluskunta, a volunteer defense organization that prepared Finnish civilians for exactly the kind of war that most people hoped would never come. The Finnish army's training philosophy was built around a simple conviction. In a war against Russia, Finland would always be outnumbered. The only equalizer was accuracy. Every Finnish soldier was expected to shoot well. The best shooters were expected to shoot exceptionally. Häyhä exceeded every standard the Civil Guard set. At 150 meters, he hit targets 97% of the time. At 300 meters, 89%. At 500 meters, 72%. His instructors recorded that he displayed exceptional calmness under simulated pressure. He did not rush. He did not tense. He breathed correctly and squeezed the trigger the same way every time, as if the stakes didn't exist. After completing his service, he returned to the farm. He continued competing with the Civil Guard on weekends. Between 1926 and 1939, he won multiple Finnish national marksmanship championships. His rifle of choice was a Mosin Nagant M2830, a Finnish modified version of the standard Russian Mosin Nagant, refined by the Finnish arms manufacturer Sako. Better trigger, better stock geometry, better sights. Same caliber, 7.62 by 54 mm R. He never used a telescopic sight, not in competition, not later in war. He didn't need one. On the 30th of November, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The pretext was manufactured. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov claimed Finnish artillery had fired on Soviet territory. It was a lie. Stalin wanted a buffer zone around Leningrad. He had demanded Finland cede land. Finland had refused, so Stalin sent in an army. The numbers were staggering. The Red Army deployed approximately 450,000 troops for the initial assault, backed by 6,000 tanks and 3,500 aircraft. Soviet planners estimated Finland would fall within 2 weeks. Some estimates said 10 days. Finland had approximately 300,000 military-age men in total. They had no tanks to speak of. They had 114 aircraft. They had no significant foreign allies prepared to intervene. They had no reason, on paper, to expect anything other than rapid defeat. They had one thing the Soviets didn't account for. They knew their own land. The terrain of southern and central Finland is not tank country. It is not open-field infantry country. It is forest. Dense, road-poor, frozen lake forest. Soviet armored columns were funneled onto the few roads that existed. Finnish defenders used the trees. They moved on skis. They appeared from unexpected angles, hit supply lines, and disappeared before Soviet commanders could respond. The Soviets called it guerrilla warfare. The Finns called it fighting at home. Simo Häyhä received his mobilization papers on the 30th of November, 1939. The same day the invasion began. He reported immediately to his Civil Guard unit in the nearby town of Mantla. He was assigned to the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34, JR 34, and deployed to the Kola River sector. This was a defensive line approximately 50 kilometers northeast of his family farm. He had hunted that ground since he was a teenager. The Soviets didn't know that. They should have. The Kola River was strategically vital. If the Soviet 155th Rifle Division broke through here, they would advance toward Viborg, Finland's second-largest city. Losing Viborg meant losing the war in the south. Finnish commanders assigned roughly 4,000 men to hold the Kola line. The Soviets hit it with 14,000. The first major assault came on the 7th of December, 1939. Soviet doctrine at the time emphasized what military historians call human wave tactics, mass infantry assaults designed to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers, accepting high casualties as acceptable in exchange for forward momentum. They sent wave after wave across the frozen river. Finnish machine guns opened fire. By nightfall, Soviet casualties numbered in the thousands. Finnish casualties were counted in the dozens. The exchange ratio was unlike anything Soviet commanders had prepared for. Häyhä fought in this initial battle as a standard rifleman. He estimated 12 hits from 42 rounds fired. But what he noticed during those first hours changed the course of the war, at least in his sector. The Soviets moved predictably. They followed roads. They bunched together. They advanced in the open. They exposed themselves at the same angles again and again. Häyhä had spent 22 years hunting animals in this exact terrain. Animals move unpredictably. Prey that moves in patterns doesn't survive long. He requested transfer to independent sniper operations. His company commander approved it on the 9th of December, 1939. Simo Häyhä was now hunting. Häyhä's method was not complicated. That was the point. Every morning before dawn, he left Finnish lines alone. No spotter, no partner. He moved forward 200 to 400 meters into the no man's land between Finnish and Soviet positions. He selected a firing position, typically a natural snowdrift, a depression in the ground, or the base of a large pine tree. Then he prepared the position. He compacted the snow around himself with his hands, packing it so his body's heat wouldn't melt it and create an uneven surface that a Soviet observer might notice. He cleared a small channel in front of his rifle muzzle. When a rifle fires in cold, dry air, the muzzle blast kicks up a spray of snow around the barrel. That spray is visible at a significant distance. By clearing it in advance, he eliminated that indicator. He packed snow into his mouth. This is worth pausing on. In temperatures below -20, exhaled breath creates a visible vapor plume. Soviet counter-snipers were trained to look for exactly this, a small white cloud rising from a snowdrift where there should be nothing. Häyhä held snow in his mouth to keep his exhaled breath below the condensation temperature. No vapor, no visible sign of breathing. He was, to Soviet eyes scanning the tree line, invisible. His rifle was the Mosin Nagant M2830, Seiko manufacture, the same one he had used in shooting competitions for over a decade. No modification, no telescopic sight. Many accounts have questioned this choice. Every Soviet counter-sniper sent to hunt him used a scoped rifle. Why would the most effective sniper in history refuse optics? The answer is practical and reveals something fundamental about how Häyhä thought. In temperatures of -40, telescopic sights fog. The optical glass contracts slightly, and moisture that has entered the housing condenses on the interior surface. At the worst possible moment, when a target presents itself briefly, the scope is useless. Iron sights do not fog. Scopes glint. On a clear winter day, the reflection from a lens can be spotted from hundreds of meters. Iron sights, matte and low profile, produce no reflection. Scopes require a shooter to raise their head higher above the snow to achieve proper eye relief. Every centimeter of elevation increases the visible silhouette. Häyhä kept his head as low as physically possible. And finally, speed. In competition shooting, Häyhä had trained himself to acquire a target and fire with iron sights in approximately 1.5 seconds. With a scope, even experienced shooters average nearly 3 seconds. When a Soviet soldier crossed a gap between trees for a fraction of a second, 1.5 seconds was the difference between a kill and a miss. He fired at preferred ranges of 200 to 280 meters. This was a deliberate choice. At that range, the 7.62 by 54 mm R round retained more than 1,800 foot-pounds of energy, more than sufficient for an instant kill. Bullet drop at 250 meters was manageable and consistent with his years of practice. And at that range, Soviet soldiers searching for him after a shot could not reliably identify his exact position using sound alone. He fired. He waited. He watched. If another target appeared, he fired again. After no more than 3 shots from any one position, he withdrew 50 meters and established a new position. He never spent more than 90 minutes in any single location. He was never found. The effect on Soviet morale was extraordinary. Patrols began returning, when they returned at all, with accounts of invisible death. 1 shot, a soldier falls. No sound of a rifle. No muzzle flash spotted. No footprints found afterward. The forests around the Kola River began to feel, to Soviet soldiers, like a place where the landscape itself was killing them. Soviet interrogation records from the period, many of which became available after the Cold War, show that soldiers requested transfers away from the Kola sector in numbers that alarmed their commanders. Some refused patrol duties outright and accepted punishment rather than walk into the forest. A Red Army captain's report from January 1940 described morale in his battalion as severely degraded due to unexplained sniper activity in the sector, with soldiers expressing a belief that the enemy had positioned a team of between 6 and 10 snipers operating in coordinated shifts. There was no team. There was one farmer with iron sights and 22 years of patience. Häyhä kept a personal log. Every kill was recorded. Date, time, estimated range, conditions. He treated it the way a farmer might record crop yields, or a hunter might log the season's take. Clinical, methodical, completely without drama. By the 22nd of December 1939, 13 days into his independent operations, his confirmed rifle kills stood at 87. Confirmed kills required verification. Because Häyhä operated alone, direct witnesses were rare. His company commander used a consistent method. Finnish soldiers advancing to reclaim ground would locate the Soviet casualties and cross-reference the positions, wounds, and timing against Häyhä's reports. The numbers consistently matched. The kills were real. His daily average in December 1939 was 5.3 confirmed kills. For context, military historians who have studied sniper effectiveness across multiple conflicts have calculated that the average combat sniper in World War II achieved somewhere between 0.6 and 1.2 confirmed kills per day of active operation. On his worst days, Häyhä was 4 times the average. On his best days, he was 10 times the average. Soviet command was not passive. By early January 1940, the pattern of casualties in the Kola sector had become too consistent to ignore. A single sniper, or what they still believed was a team, was inflicting casualties at a rate that was statistically destroying unit cohesion in the sector. On the 8th of January 1940, the Red Army deployed dedicated counter-sniper teams to Kola. These were not ordinary infantry. They were trained Soviet marksmen, equipped with the Mosin Nagant 9130 PU, a scoped variant with a 3.5 power telescopic sight. They operated in pairs, a spotter with binoculars and a shooter. Their orders were specific: locate and neutralize White Death. Their tactics were textbook. Identify probable firing positions by studying the terrain and the casualty patterns. Establish observation posts. Wait for a muzzle flash or a vapor cloud. Coordinate suppressive fire with precision return shots. It failed completely. The muzzle flash didn't exist. The vapor cloud didn't exist. The probable positions were always empty when Soviet patrols checked them. Häyhä had already moved 50 meters and re-established. Soviet counter-snipers searched the forest for White Death for weeks. They did not find him. Several of them were found by Finnish scouts afterward. Soviet command escalated. On the 15th of January, 1940, Red Army artillery saturated a 500-meter section of the forest in Häyhä's operational area. 200 shells from 122mm howitzers. The bombardment lasted 30 minutes. It destroyed empty forest. Häyhä had observed the artillery positioning and pre-registration process. Soviet guns don't simply fire. They go through a preparation sequence that takes time. He recognized what was coming, withdrew 800 meters, and waited out the bombardment from a position the shells never reached. When Finnish scouts moved through the area after the shelling, they found the remains of old firing positions. Positions Häyhä had used and abandoned days earlier. The Soviets had spent 200 heavy artillery rounds destroying snow and trees. Häyhä was 800 meters away, already planning the next morning's operation. In January 1940, Häyhä's daily kill rate increased. January in Finland is brutally cold, the coldest month in the coldest winter the region had experienced in decades. Temperatures reached minus 45 degrees Celsius. This killed Soviet offensive momentum. Soldiers who had been issued inadequate winter clothing suffered severe frostbite. Unit cohesion degraded. Supply lines froze. Tanks seized up. Artillery shells became less reliable in extreme cold. For Häyhä, the cold was not a problem. It was home. He'd spent 30 years in it. He knew what clothing to wear, how to keep his hands functional in extreme cold without using gloves that impaired trigger control, and how to keep the mechanism of his rifle from freezing. He kept the rifle as dry as possible, avoiding the temptation to use oil, which congealed in extreme cold and could slow or jam the bolt. He used no lubricant on the action. Dry metal on dry metal. It worked every time. His confirmed kills passed 200 by mid-January. By the 1st of February 1940, they stood at 219. The Soviets tried one more approach. On the 22nd of January 1940, a Soviet infiltration team of 8 soldiers crossed Finnish lines at night. They moved without lights. They established an ambush position at a trail intersection, 300 meters behind Finnish defensive lines. Their mission was to wait for Häyhä to emerge on his morning route and kill him from concealment. It was, in theory, a sound plan. At 6:45 in the morning, Häyhä approached that trail intersection. He stopped. In his 1998 interview, he described this moment simply. Something was wrong. He could not explain what specifically. The silence had a different quality. The snow around the intersection had a slightly different texture, as if it had been disturbed. 22 years of hunting had given him a sensitivity to the landscape that military training does not produce. He withdrew. He circled 400 meters east and approached from a completely different angle. At 7:30 in the morning, he observed all 8 members of the Soviet ambush team from behind. They were watching the trail. Their attention was entirely forward. He shot 4 of them before the others realized the threat was behind them. The surviving 4 fled. The ambush intended to kill him had instead cost the Soviets 4 more men. By the 22nd of February, 1940, Häyhä's confirmed rifle kills stood at 387. The 155th Soviet Rifle Division submitted a formal report to Red Army Command, recommending the counter-sniper operations against White Death be suspended. The report stated, with unusual candor for Soviet military bureaucracy, that individual tactical efforts to neutralize the target had failed to produce results and had resulted in additional Soviet casualties. The recommended alternative was saturation bombardment of the entire operational area over an extended period. Remove the trees, remove the cover, makes sniping in the sector structurally impossible. Soviet command approved it. Beginning on the 22nd of February, Red Army artillery began a sustained, systematic bombardment of the forest in Häyhä's sector. Not targeted strikes, saturation fire, 500 shells per day, every day, for 12 consecutive days. 6,000 heavy artillery rounds fell on 3 square kilometers of Finnish forest. The terrain was transformed. Trees were reduced to splinters. Snow and soil and shrapnel were mixed into an ugly gray crust. The dense, concealing pine forest that Häyhä had used since December was gone. Häyhä adapted. He began digging shallow fighting positions in the open ground, small depressions that gave minimal but real concealment. He reduced his operating windows to 90 minutes maximum per day, moving at dawn and dusk, when low-angle light made observation from Soviet positions most difficult. He reduced his shots per position from 3 to 2. He changed his position after every pair of shots. His kill rate decreased. But it did not stop. Between the 22nd of February and the 5th of March 1940, the final 13 days of the saturation bombardment period, Häyhä killed 73 more Soviet soldiers. His total passed 460. The Soviets had destroyed the landscape, deployed specialized counter-sniper teams, fired thousands of artillery shells, and attempted a targeted assassination ambush. None of it had stopped him. The 6th of March, 1940. Temperature, -38 Celsius. Light snow falling. Visibility, approximately 400 meters. Häyhä had been in position since 5 in the morning. He had been lying in the snow for 1 hour and 32 minutes. He had fired 4 rounds, 3 hits, 1 miss. 3 Soviet soldiers were dead. He was preparing to relocate. At 6:32 in the morning, a 6-man Soviet patrol appeared to his northeast. They were moving differently than most Soviet patrols. Slowly, methodically. They were scanning snowdrifts, checking the base of broken trees, examining disturbed snow. They were hunter-killers, a specialist team trained to find snipers by reading the terrain, the way Häyhä read the terrain. He observed them for 40 seconds. They were 320 meters away, at the edge of his comfortable range, with iron sights and poor light. He calculated. 22 inches of bullet drop at that range. Wind from the left at approximately 10 miles per hour. 9 inches of horizontal drift. He aimed high and to the right of the lead soldier. He exhaled. He fired. The lead soldier fell. What happened in the next 15 seconds was unlike anything Häyhä had faced in 97 days of combat. The 5 remaining Soviet soldiers did not scatter. They did not retreat. They dropped into cover simultaneously, trained, disciplined movement, and they opened fire with immediate, coordinated precision. Not random suppressive fire, aimed fire. Something about this shot, perhaps a slight snow disturbance from the muzzle, perhaps an angle of light that revealed his silhouette for a fraction of a second, had given them his position. 40 rounds in 15 seconds, impacting in a concentrated pattern around his location. He could not move. The fire was too accurate. He was pinned. Then 1 round connected. At 6:33 in the morning, a Soviet bullet struck Simo Häyhä in the lower left side of his face. The round entered through his left cheek. It traveled laterally through his jaw, shattering bone and teeth. It exited through his right cheek. The hydraulic shock of a high-velocity rifle bullet traveling through soft tissue and bone is, in the language of ballistic physics, catastrophic. The jaw was destroyed. Multiple teeth were gone. The tongue was lacerated. Blood flooded his airway. He was choking. He was losing consciousness. He had 290 meters of open ground between himself and the Finnish defensive line. He left his rifle in the snow. He began to crawl. The Soviet patrol saw the blood trail. They advanced. Häyhä crawled. 50 meters. Blood pouring. consciousness fading, the Soviets closing behind him. Finnish machine gunners on the defensive line spotted movement. They saw a man crawling toward them. They saw Soviet soldiers pursuing. 2 Maxim machine guns opened fire, 600 rounds per minute each, laying down sustained suppressive fire between Häyhä and the Soviet patrol. The Soviets went to ground. Finnish soldiers ran forward into the open ground between the lines. They reached Häyhä at 6:39 in the morning, 7 minutes after he had been shot. They dragged him across the snow to the Finnish line. He was alive. Barely. Finnish medics at the regimental aid station assessed him at 7:15 in the morning. The injury was critical. Massive facial trauma, severe blood loss, compromised airway. Blood and tissue were blocking his throat. He could not breathe properly. Intubation was impossible. His jaw was too badly damaged to allow the necessary access. Field surgeons performed an emergency cricothyrotomy, a surgical incision in the membrane between the thyroid and cricoid cartilage below the larynx, through which they inserted a breathing tube directly into the airway. He could breathe. They evacuated him to a field hospital 15 kilometers behind the lines. He arrived at 9:30 in the morning. Surgeons worked on him for 6 hours. The left jawbone was destroyed. The right was fractured. 6 teeth were gone. Soft tissue damage was extensive throughout the lower face and throat. Multiple blood vessels had been severed, but had clotted, which was the only reason he was still alive. The bullet had passed within 8 millimeters of his carotid artery. 8 millimeters was the margin between the man who crawled to safety and a man who would have bled to death in the snow within 90 seconds. He survived the surgery. He did not regain consciousness for several days. On the 13th of March, 1940, 1 week after Häyhä was shot, Finland and the Soviet Union signed the Moscow Peace Treaty. The Winter War was over. Finland had not been conquered, but the cost was severe. Finland ceded 11% of its territory, including the entire Karelian Isthmus, and with it, Häyhä's home region of Rautjärvi. The farm his family had worked for generations became Soviet soil. His family had already evacuated west. The farm was gone. Finland's total casualties for the war? Approximately 70,000, with just under 26,000 killed in action. Soviet casualties? Estimates range from 300,000 to 350,000, with official figures now accepted at approximately 126,000 killed. Some historians place the real number considerably higher. Finland had faced an army more than 3 times its size, with incomparably superior equipment, and had inflicted casualties at a ratio of roughly 5 Soviet soldiers for every Finnish soldier lost. It was one of the most remarkable defensive performances in modern military history. And one Finnish farmer, with a bolt-action rifle and iron sights, had contributed 542 of the Soviet dead, on his own. 432 confirmed with his rifle, the remainder with his KP-31 submachine gun in close-range engagements. 542 men in 98 days of combat, 5.5 per day. Häyhä remained in hospital until July 1940. Surgeons performed 3 separate reconstruction operations on his jaw. They used bone grafts to rebuild the destroyed mandible. They reconstructed the left cheek. The results were partially successful. His face was permanently altered. The left cheek slightly collapsed, the jaw misaligned, a visible difference in the symmetry of his face that would remain for the rest of his long life. He could speak. He could eat, slowly. He was alive. On the 17th of July, 1940, he was discharged. The Finnish military promoted him to second lieutenant, a field promotion recognizing his service. He received the Cross of Kola, Finland's highest decoration for service in the Winter War. The medal was presented personally by Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, Commander-in-Chief of the Finnish Armed Forces. Mannerheim reportedly asked Häyhä how he had become such an exceptional marksman. Häyhä's reported answer? Practice. Häyhä could not return to Rautjärvi. It was Soviet territory now. The Finnish government was resettling thousands of displaced Karelian families, compensating them with land elsewhere in Finland. Häyhä received 50 acres in Ruokolahti, approximately 80 kilometers west of his childhood home. He built a house, he farmed, he hunted, though less than before, and never competitively again. He lived alone. He never married. When Finland entered the continuation war against the Soviet Union in 1941, Häyhä volunteered to serve again. The army declined his application. His injuries were assessed as too severe for frontline combat duty. He was assigned instead to train new marksmen. He taught exactly what he had practiced for 2 decades: breath control, position, consistency, patience. How to read terrain. How to use cold to your advantage rather than fight it. How to stay still longer than feels humanly possible. Finnish snipers who trained during the continuation war, influenced directly or indirectly by Häyhä's methods, achieved average kill rates meaningfully higher than any other nation's snipers during the same conflict. The methodology worked. Häyhä lived simply and privately for decades. He refused interviews. He refused to discuss the war in detail with journalists or historians. When veterans organizations invited him to speak at public events, he declined. He attended occasional gatherings quietly, as one veteran among many. In private, former neighbors and Finnish historians who knew him described a man of extraordinary ordinariness. He talked about his farm. He talked about hunting. He didn't talk about the war. In 1998, at the age of 92, he agreed to one documented, recorded interview with a Finnish historian. The historian asked many questions. Häyhä answered in short sentences. When asked whether he felt any hesitation about the killing, whether the weight of the numbers had ever troubled him, Häyhä said this: "I did what I was ordered to do. I fulfilled my duty. When men come to take your country, someone must stop them. I was able to stop them. I don't celebrate that. I don't regret it." When asked if he considered himself a hero, he said, "No. Heroes are the ones buried in Kollaa. I came home. That is all." When asked if he thought about the Soviet soldiers he had killed, he paused for a long time before answering. He said, "They were soldiers like me. They followed orders like me. I didn't hate them. The war was not their decision. They were in the forest, and I was in the forest, and I saw them first. That is all it was." Simo Häyhä died on the 1st of April 2002. He was 96 years old. He had lived 62 years after being shot in the face. He had outlived the Soviet Union, which collapsed in 1991, by 11 years. He had outlived the empire that sent 542 soldiers into the forest he grew up hunting in. His funeral was attended by 300 people: Finnish veterans, local politicians, journalists who had spent years trying to interview him. The president of Finland sent condolences. His gravestone in Ruokolahti is simple: his name, his birth date, his death date. One word beneath: soldier. Military analysts have studied Häyhä's record for decades. The question they consistently return to is not simply what he did, but how it was structurally possible. The answer is not one thing. It is never one thing. He brought skills that cannot be manufactured on a training range. 22 years of hunting in exact terrain gave him an intimacy with that specific landscape that no amount of map reading replicates. He knew where the ground dipped in ways that weren't visible from 100 meters away. He knew which snowdrifts were stable enough to hold his weight without shifting. He knew which angles of approach put the morning sun behind him and in Soviet eyes. He operated alone. This is counterintuitive. Military doctrine emphasizes teamwork, mutual support, redundancy. But for Häyhä's style of operation, a second person was a liability. More noise, more breath vapor, more movement, more decision-making complexity. Alone, he was an invisible point of lethal pressure. With a partner, he becomes a two-person team that is twice as detectable. He was psychologically suited to the work in a way that most humans are not. Killing requires a kind of dissociation that many people find impossible to sustain. Häyhä did not discuss this at length in his interview, but what he did say, that he approached sniping the way he approached hunting, as problem-solving rather than violence, suggests a capacity to categorize the work as functional rather than emotional. He didn't hate, he didn't fear. He observed, calculated, and acted. For 98 days. And the Soviets, it must be said, were not uniformly well-trained or well-led in the early months of the Winter War. Soviet officers had been decimated by Stalin's purges of the military leadership between 1937 and 1939. The men who remained were often inexperienced, politically appointed, or so frightened of making decisions that might be blamed on them that they defaulted to rigid doctrine even when doctrine was failing catastrophically in front of them. The human wave tactics that poured Soviet soldiers across the frozen Kola River were not tactically sound against Finnish defenders. They were doctrinally mandated. They continued because changing them required a kind of institutional courage the Soviet command structure had been systematically stripped of. Häyhä exploited this. He learned Soviet patrol patterns in his sector within the first week of operations. He studied where they entered the forest. He predicted where they would pass. He positioned himself there and waited. The patterns changed too slowly. By the time Soviet tactics adapted in any meaningful way, the Winter War was 6 weeks from ending. Today, Häyhä is studied in sniper training programs around the world. Not as mythology, as case study. American military doctrine, British Army training, Israeli Defense Forces curriculum, all include analysis of his methods. The lessons are genuinely transferable across 8 decades. Minimize your visible signature at every level. Understand your terrain better than your enemy. Fire and move before the enemy can triangulate. Never establish patterns. Patience beats speed. Simplicity beats complexity. The fundamentals of marksmanship, breath, position, trigger squeeze, cannot be replaced by technology. His Mosin Nagant M2830 was recovered from the snow after he was wounded. Finnish soldiers brought it back to Finnish lines. It was assigned to another sniper for the remainder of the Winter War. After the war, it was returned to Seiko for refurbishment. The original barrel had fired enough rounds to approach the end of its accurate service life and was replaced. The rifle was then used at the Finnish Army Sniper School for 4 decades. In 1988, it was retired and transferred to the Finnish Military Museum in Helsinki, where it remains on display. The exhibit label describes it simply: Simo Häyhä's Mosin Nagant M2830. Used in achieving confirmed sniper kills in the Winter War, 1939 to 1940. 542 men died in those forests because one of their opponents grew up in them. Because a Finnish father took his son hunting at age 12. Because a boy learned to read wind and snow and silence before he learned anything that would appear on a military record. Because the land around Rautjärvi shaped a person in a way that no training program, however rigorous, ever quite replicates. The Soviet Union sent 450,000 soldiers into Finland in November 1939. It expected the country to fall in 2 weeks. Finland fought for 105 days. It lost territory. It did not lose its independence. Simo Häyhä's contribution to that outcome is impossible to calculate with precision. But 542 Soviet soldiers who entered the Kola sector never left it. Entire patrols vanished. Unit morale in the sector degraded to the point where men chose punishment over returning to the forest. Counter-sniper teams, artillery units, and specialized hunter-killer squads were dedicated to stopping one man. Resources and attention pulled away from other parts of the front. One person, one rifle, iron sights. He was never once seen. He went home. He farmed. He lived quietly for 62 more years. He watched the Soviet Union collapse before he died. He never celebrated that. He never needed to. He had done what was necessary, nothing more. If Simo Häyhä's story stayed with you, if you want more stories like this, stories about the people history forgot to make famous, subscribe, hit the bell. Every single subscriber helps these stories reach people who've never heard them. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Have you ever heard of the Winter War before today? Let me know. And thank you for watching. These people lived these things. The least we can do is remember.